Hi there, welcome to Nonsense Whisky. My name's VinPF, and on today's episode we're going to be covering another Irish whisky. Now, at the beginning of the year I made a promise that I'm going to be covering a lot more Irish whisky and rye American whiskies, because they're two kind of genres of whisky that I'm not really that well versed in. I want to explore the genres and bring that exploration to you, the lovely viewer. Today I've got a sample that I picked up a couple of years ago now. It's been sat on my shelf since then, but it's the Irishman Founders Reserve. And this is produced by Walsh Whisky. Now they weren't typically a producer. At 1999 when they started, they used to dabble in liqueurs and kind of Irish coffee, things like whiskey mixed with other stuff. And then they brought this out in 2007, followed by stuff like Writer's Tears, which I've covered, link up here, and that came out in 2009. So this was the first actual whiskey they brought out, let's say, but they don't really produce it. They've actually just opened up their distillery themselves, I think in like 2016, something like that. So this stuff isn't quite their whiskey just yet, but it's still their creation. This one itself is sitting in a Jason Whiskey Wise glass underneath coin 164. So if you're interested in this coin or any of the other coins, don't forget to check out the description below and you can see how to get your hands on one. This whiskey itself is a little bit interesting, because it's Irish whiskey, so therefore it's triple distilled, because there are barely any Irish whiskies that aren't triple distilled. There are a couple, but this one here is technically a blended whiskey, and it even says it on the bottle, but it's a 70% single malt Irish whiskey mixed with 30% single pot still whiskey. Now the pot still whiskey is a bit of a confusing term, because the single malt whiskey is still in a pot still, but to be called a single malt whiskey, you have to use malted barley. But the 30% of this isn't malted barley. There's parts of it that are unmalted barley, so they can't call it a single malt. Therefore, they call it a single pot still. A bit confusing, but the terms are out there. If you have a look on Wikipedia, there's a lovely article you can have a look at to see what all the differences are. Aged in ex-bourbon barrels, it's a fairly, on paper, fairly typical Irish whiskey. Delivered at 40%. In the UK, roughly £35. I picked this sample up in Dublin Airport for about £3 or £4, something like that. Let's get into the nose and see what it's all about. Now, right off the bat, I'm getting quite a lot of vanilla influence. There's some apple notes in there as well. But it's quite light, it's quite grassy even, which is a little bit interesting. I think that must be the kind of unmalted barley, but I don't know for sure. Let's try on the palate. Again, a lot more vanillas. Some more of those apples coming through, but it's not kind of typical apple. It's kind of apple mixed with cinnamon. Reminds me of an apple crumble almost, but not quite as sweet. Finish is kind of medium-y. It isn't overly long, and it isn't really very in your face, but it's certainly got its place. You know, it's a very light and enjoyable whiskey, very easy to drink. I think personally it's a little bit too expensive. I mean, maybe there's some reasons why it is, I don't know. For my personal feeling, I preferred the Writer's Tears, which I've, again, covered if you haven't checked that link out. That's a couple of pounds cheaper, but I think that's just a little bit more interesting for my palate. That said, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this whatsoever. £35, I think you can get some pretty exceptional whiskey for that price if you're looking in the right places. I think this could probably do with maybe being £5 less, but that's just me.